Hey everyone, and welcome. If you've been trying to keep up with the news, you'd be forgiven for being a little confused. U.S. foreign policy can seem kind of chaotic right now, almost like it's contradicting itself. But what if it's not? What if there's a bigger plan here, a whole new playbook that connects all these strange moves? Well, today, we're going to decode it. Okay, let's just jump right into the central mystery, because it's a big one. On one hand, you've got the U.S. picking these pretty serious trade fights with its closest allies, like Canada. And then, on the other hand, it's sending billions of dollars to a historically unstable economy like Argentina. It doesn't seem to add up. But as we're about to see, it's anything but random. So here are the four main puzzle pieces we're looking at today. On the surface, they look like completely separate stories, right? A tariff over here, a threat about a treaty over there, a massive bailout, and even a military operation. But I'm telling you, they all fit together to reveal a really radical shift in American strategy. Let's start putting them in place. So, let's start with the first piece of our puzzle, and it's happening right on America's doorstep. I'm talking about the world's largest trading relationship, and it is showing some really serious cracks. Understanding what's going on with Canada and Mexico, that's the first key to unlocking this whole new playbook. At the very heart of the fight with Canada is this fundamental clash of systems. See, in the U.S., most timber is sold on private land at whatever price the market will bear. But in Canada, most of it is on government land, and the government just sets the price. So for decades, the U.S. has been arguing that this is basically an unfair subsidy that lets Canadian lumber get dumped into the U.S. market super cheap. Now, this fight isn't new, but how it's being fought now, that's what's completely different. And trust me, this fight really matters. Why? Because the U.S. is massively dependent on Canadian wood. I mean, just last year, in 2024, the U.S. imported about $11 billion worth. We simply cannot build all the houses we need without it. And that dependency, well, it's now being used as a weapon. This brings us to the core of the new strategy, something called tariff stacking. The U.S. isn't just using the normal old-school trade duties anymore. Now it's stacking national security tariffs on top of those. And in some cases, it's even adding a third layer of national emergency tariffs. This is a huge shift. It's moving from a legal dispute to a political weapon, and it's creating these massive, totally unpredictable price shocks for American homebuilders. And this lumber fight is just one front in the battle. The entire North American trade bloc, the whole shebang, is facing a potential crisis. And it's all tied to a very specific date, thanks to a ticking clock that was built right into the USMCA, the deal that replaced NAFTA. So, buried deep in the fine print of the USMCA is this thing called a Sunset Clause. And what it means is that in 2026, all three countries, the US, Mexico, and Canada, have to actively agree to keep the deal going. If just one of them says no, the agreement doesn't die instantly, but it enters this terrifying year-to-year survival mode. And now, U.S. officials are signaling they might just say no as a way to force Canada and Mexico into other concessions. It is some seriously high-stakes brinksmanship. Okay, now let's pivot and head south, because at the exact same time the U.S. is squeezing its established northern allies, it's making these massive, incredibly risky bets on historically unstable partners. And this really sharp contrast, this is where the new playbook starts to come into focus. First up, Argentina. The U.S. Treasury recently announced a $20 billion financial support package for them. $20 billion for a country that has defaulted on its debt 9 times? That is a staggering amount of money and a huge risk. So the obvious question is, why? And the answer lies in how they're doing it. The money's coming from something called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, or ESF. Think of it as this special pot of money that the Treasury can use for foreign policy goals with just the president's okay. And here's the kicker. It doesn't need a new vote from Congress. It's a powerful tool that lets them act fast and alone, bypassing all the usual political debate. So why take such a huge risk? Well, there are 3 really big reasons. 1, to push back against China's growing influence in South America. 2, to secure access to the lithium triangle. Argentina has a ton of lithium, and it is absolutely essential for EV batteries. And 3, to prop up the new, staunchly pro-American government of President Milei. This isn't about economics, it's pure geopolitics. But here's the thing about these big geopolitical chess moves. There are always winners and losers back home. A stabilized Argentina is an agricultural superpower. So by helping them out, the U.S. is basically creating a massive new competitor for its own farmers in the global soy and beef markets.
It's a calculated trade-off.
And if you thought that was bold, the bets get even bigger and way more direct. The strategy also includes plans for military intervention, like we see in planning documents for Venezuela. One potential timeline for 2026 shows this incredibly rapid sequence of events. In just 1 week, the U.S. could go from sanctions to direct intervention, seizing oil assets, and planning a total overhaul of the country's entire energy industry. This isn't just a policy change, it's a playbook for regime change.
Okay, let's take a breath. We've seen the different pieces: pressure on our allies up north, and these huge financial and military interventions in the south. So now, it's time to put it all together and reveal the unifying theory that connects all of it.
This is it. This is the new American playbook. The name for it is Aggressive Hemispheric Integration. And the goal is pretty straightforward: to tighten U.S. control over the entire Western Hemisphere. That means demanding strict compliance from established partners, while at the same time actively remaking weaker nations to serve U.S. strategic interests, especially when it comes to securing critical supply chains.
This quote from the source material just sums it up perfectly. The old rules of global trade, they're out the window. It's not about everyone playing nice by the same rulebook anymore. It's about using economic power as a weapon for strategic geopolitical goals.
This whole new strategy really rests on 3 core principles. First, executive risk, meaning the president is making these massive calls pretty much on his own, using tools like the ESF and emergency tariffs. Second, economic statecraft. That's just a fancy way of saying that tariffs and bailouts are now being used as weapons. And finally, and this one is crucial, the friend-shoring trap. This means that just because a country is an ally, like Canada, doesn't mean it's safe. In this playbook, friend is a political term, not an economic guarantee.
So, that's the big picture. But what does all this really mean for you and your business? I mean, this isn't just theory, right? This new reality demands a whole new survival guide. So let's break down the practical steps you might need to consider.
If you're in construction or real estate, your big risk is these sudden politically driven spikes in lumber prices. So, what's the move? You've got to start putting price escalation clauses in your contracts to protect yourself. And maybe start seriously looking at alternative materials now, because being 100% reliant on Canada is a proven risk.
For all you manufacturers out there, that 2026 USMCA deadline is a huge threat. You need to be auditing your supply chain for compliance like yesterday. Expect customs to get a lot tougher. And if you're in tech, the digital trade rules in that deal are absolutely critical, so it's probably time to start pushing for the deal's renewal through your trade groups.
And finally, for agriculture and energy. Farmers, you're facing brand new competition from Argentina, so doubling down on Made in USA branding is probably a smart move. Small oil producers, you might want to hedge against price drops when all that Venezuelan oil eventually comes back online. But for oil service companies, there's a massive opportunity here, a potential gold rush. The time to start looking for partners in Venezuela is probably now.
And all of this brings us to our final critical question. For decades, businesses have focused on outsmarting their competition. But in this new era of aggressive hemispheric integration, your biggest risk might not be another company at all. It might be a certain policy change out of Washington. The game has totally changed. The only question left is, are you ready to play?